I first met David 56.5 years ago when I went to Edinburgh University as a student. And in my first term, in October 1957, he lectured on Aeneid 2. And curiously, I still have on my shelves a notebook with the notes of those lectures, and I got them out. And it was quite interesting to look at them, because, of course, we all think very much of his innovative approach and so on. But what he was doing at that stage in his career for the innocent first-year students was very straight traditional scholarship. There are lots of discussions of grammatical points, allusions, and so on. But what I remember, you know, the sort of image in my mind was the same sort of energy which engaged you with the text. But somehow he was able to do both things. And the style which he developed later clearly took a bit of time to build up. It was a style which, as we've heard and we've seen demonstrated, was immensely powerful in educating people. And I have to confess that straightforward plagiarism of the style did get me a certain reputation for teaching in various places I taught. And I have no shame in saying that, because if you have a master to follow, why should you not follow? Just two things of the way he was devoted to all his pupils and the time he put into them. At the end of the term, that first term, 5 or 6 of us got a message from him that on the eve of the first day of the spring term, he wanted us to go to his house in Morningside, and we were each to write a short 5-minute paper on a topic in Aeneid 2. And we were going to read them to each other and discuss them that evening. And we each were given a topic. And curiously, again, I'm a terrible person, I still have what I wrote. And it was about the apparitions in Aeneid 2, and I suppose we now talk about it as a saying that they were externalizing the conflicts that were going on inside Aeneas, very obvious stuff, as you would expect. But we had the most marvellous evening. And the way, again, which Catherine mentioned, that we were treated as equals, although there was this vast distance of what we knew and our experience and so on. Pamela provided a wonderful meal, and being typical undergraduates, we didn't know when to leave. Eventually, about 1 in the morning, David sort of, you know, gently shuffled us out of the house. And I can always remember him leaning elegantly, because he was a very elegant man, against the doorpost of his house in Morningside, waving us off the premises. So, you know, not many people, even in those days when people were pretty kind to do this kind of thing, would have done that for their pupils. Then in the following year, he was doing Latin prose. He was doing my Latin proses. And I don't know whether it was in despair at how bad they were, or some belief that they were not too bad, but came the Easter vacation, and he said, I think this vacation, we should each get the Times every day and turn the third leader into Latin prose. Oof. And then after the vacation, we'll get together and exchange copies and see what we think of them. Now, you know, he took that on. I don't know why he did it, but of course it was an immensely educational thing, since I was really quite lazy in vacations. It was jolly good for me to do it. But again, just think of that commitment. And that commitment, you know, went through everything he did. He was quite amazing, and a wonderful role model for someone who was going to be a teacher. I think something that has not been mentioned today, because this is very much an academic symposium, is that in terms of running the university and running the department, he was a good citizen. He was Dean of the Faculty here. He was a Pro-Vice-Chancellor. And he brought, I wasn't in my time here, but I heard about it from other people. And he brought the same kind of originality and verve and energy and capacity to work with people to that task. And there were difficult things to be done, and he got on and got them done. That aspect should not be forgotten. And, you know, he was still doing all the innovative work, all the teaching, but he was contributing in that other way. And of course, very old-fashioned among us feel it's better that these jobs should be done by people who are academics and are committed to the academic endeavour, and not by people who are just brought in to be administrators. But there we go. Mustn't preach. Catherine referred to his energy, and she gave some examples of it. And we really should think about the demon sportsman. I never experienced the football that I believe was played here a good deal, but I think Tony could tell a lot about that. But when I was a student in Edinburgh, then when I was on the staff, there was a certain amount of cricket, there was a great deal of hockey. And one of the interesting things was I always felt, having in some part of my life in the north of Scotland, that David had learned his hockey on the shinty field. For those of you who know shinty, you can hit with either side of the stick, you can raise it as much as you want, and indeed great shinty players are amazing. They can take the ball whizzing through the air, take it out, bring it down. It's an astonishing game. And so every so often his trading would out, and the ball would be in the air, and poof, up it would go. And he was always very crestfallen that the foul was declared against him. And then there was the departmental tennis for Kerr Borthwaite, David West, Peter Walsh, myself, and sometimes Donald Nicholl, the Byzantinist. And this was a tennis match which almost did not need hitting the ball. There was so much thought and so much. I mean, the Australians could have learned about sledging from that point. And we had a wonderful time. And of course, he had such good eye-hand coordination. He used to stand right up against the net. And you couldn't get the ball past him. So eventually you hit it straight at him as hard as you could. And he just, boom. And this was absolutely amazing, but it was very funny. I once asked him, however, why being a Scot he didn't play golf. And he said, well, he had a terrible problem. He found it almost impossible to hit a ball that was standing still. But it's the only time I think I ever detected a slight degree of affectation, because of course he was a brilliant croquet player. And the ball was always standing still on that. And really the fiendishness of the game he took an immense delight in. He was, of course, a wonderful colleague, because in Edinburgh we had that small department that Tony referred to, and we all got on very well. There was a certain amount of cheerful contempt among the younger for the older, but we were all friends, and we spent an awful lot of time talking. You know, every morning, every afternoon, there would be an hour of talk when we perhaps should have been reading our books or whatever. And I remember on one occasion something I wrote, I acknowledged the assistance of my colleagues, and their only occasionally ribald scepticism. There was a great deal of laughter, and David was always at the centre of that. Spontaneity was another great feature. You never quite knew what was going to happen when you went to visit him. I remember coming here as external examiner, and after a very splendid dinner at Duke Willie with various people in the department and so on, somehow, and I have a problem about the transition, the party found itself after dinner on a fairly bright summer night, walking round a loch just below the Roman wall. I don't know how we got from Duke Willie to the wall. we must have had cars. It was a very muddy loch, the sides of it, and I'm told, someone else has helped me with memories of this occasion. They're also scarred by it, I suspect. There were a lot of midges. But it had seemed the right thing to do, and I think the muddiest shoes of any external examiner going to an examiner's meeting when we turned up in Newcastle the next day. Above all, what I think he did was he enhanced life. Whatever he was doing, whoever he was with, he had, as I've said, the same degree of attention and respect for them. I remember once turning up in Cambridge and getting into some kind of intellectual discussion with my 12 and 13-year-old daughters, and they were absolutely mesmerised by him. You know, they still remembered it. And years later, when Philippa was at Oxford, she phoned me up one day and said, "I've been reading David West's translation of the Iliad. It's marvellous, isn't it?" And that's, you know, someone she had just felt she should read it, because she was doing French and history and so on. When I heard about his death, one of my, well, favourite is the wrong word to use, but the poem that speaks to me came into my head. And you will probably all know it extremely well. It's Corey's translation of Callimachus's epigram about the poet Heraclitus Halicarnassus. Now, there are people who will say that, of course, the lapidary simplicity of Callimachus is more affecting than the more sentimental and elaborate rhetoric of Corey. And I think the young David, who was the great apostle of Horace, might have gone for Callimachus. But the man who in his maturity translated the Aeneid might also have thought there was something in the Corey version of it. We can leave aside, I think, the scholarly question, which, for all I know, I'm out of date, we have been solved by the sands of Egypt, whether the nightingales that are referred to are it's simply a metaphor for poetry in general, or Heraclitus's poetry, or is an actual work entitled Nightingales. We don't need to worry about that. And what Callimachus was doing, he was using the topos of the immortality of poetry to cheat death of its victory over his old friend, or at least over those who survived him. And it seems to me very appropriate today, because this event and what we all have in our heads and in our hearts about David, in fact, is what survives, just as the poetry survived. Then, of course, there is his own poetry, there is his writings, but I think, above all, the legacy he has left in us. And the poem goes, "They told me, Heraclitus, they told me you were dead. They brought me bitter news to hear, and bitter tears to shed. I wept as I remembered how often you and I had tired the sun with talking and sent him down the sky. But now that thou art lying, my dear old Pyrean guest, a handful of grey ashes, long, long ago addressed, still are thy gentle voices, thy nightingales awake, for death he taketh alway, but end